Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. Remember, confidence is key, Bria said during their crash course earlier that day. Walk like you own the place and no one will question you. Easier said than done, Darius thought as he teetered slightly on his stilettos. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before following Aran and Brock toward the restaurant's entrance. The warm glow of the lights inside spilled out onto the sidewalk, promising a cozy refuge from the cool night air. As they approached the maitre d', Darius felt a flutter of panic in his chest. This was it, the first real test of his disguise. He forced himself to relax, channeling the poise Bria had drilled into him. "Good evening," the maitre d' greeted them with a polite smile. "Do you have a reservation?" Brock stepped forward, his voice smooth and confident. "Yes, under the name Thompson. Party of 3. The maitre d' scanned the list, nodding as he found the name. "Ah, yes. Right this way, please." As they followed him to their table, Darius couldn't help but feel a small thrill of success. He'd made it past the first hurdle without raising any suspicions. Maybe this wouldn't be so difficult after all. They were seated at a corner table, partially secluded from the rest of the dining room. Darius appreciated the privacy, knowing it would give him a chance to observe without drawing too much attention to himself. He perused the menu, grateful for the opportunity to gather his thoughts. A waiter approached their table, his demeanor professional and attentive. "Good evening. May I start you off with some drinks?" Aaron and Brock ordered their usual scotch on the rocks, but Darius hesitated. What would a woman order in this situation? He recalled Bria's advice. "When in doubt, go for something classic and feminine." "I'll have a cosmopolitan, please," Darius said, pitching his voice slightly higher than normal. The waiter nodded, jotting down the order before disappearing towards the bar. As they waited for their drinks, Darius found himself relaxing into his role. He crossed his legs demurely, allowing his dress to drape elegantly over his knees. The conversation flowed naturally between the 3 of them, touching on innocuous topics that wouldn't raise suspicion if overheard. When their drinks arrived, Darius sipped his cosmopolitan delicately, savoring the tart sweetness. He caught Brock watching him over the rim of his glass and offered a coy smile, remembering Bria's instructions to flirt subtly but effectively. The waiter returned to take their dinner orders. Darius chose a light salad, conscious of maintaining his feminine persona. As they waited for their meals, he excused himself to visit the ladies' room, steeling himself for another test of his disguise. The restroom was mercifully empty when he entered. Darius took a moment to check his appearance in the mirror, touching up his lipstick and adjusting his wig. He was surprised by how natural he looked, the soft curves and delicate features of his face enhanced by Bria's expert makeup application. Returning to the table, Darius felt a newfound confidence in his role. He engaged in the conversation with more enthusiasm, allowing his natural charm to shine through the facade of femininity. By the time their meals arrived, he was thoroughly enjoying himself, almost forgetting the true purpose of their evening out. As they finished their dinner, Brock leaned in, his voice low and conspiratorial. "What do you say we hit the club, Cindy? I hear there's a new place that's just opened up downtown." Darius, now fully embracing his alter ego as Cindy, felt a flutter of excitement. This was where the real mission began. He nodded, a coy smile playing on his lips. "That sounds like fun. I'd love to dance." They settled the bill and made their way out of the restaurant. The night air had grown cooler, and Darius shivered slightly in his thin dress. Without missing a beat, Brock draped his jacket over Darius's shoulders, the gesture so natural it almost took him by surprise. The drive to the club was short, the city lights blurring past the car windows. As they approached their destination, Darius could feel the bass thumping through the air, growing louder as they drew near. A line of people stretched down the block, all dressed to impress and eager to get inside. Brock led them past the line, nodding to the bouncer who unclipped the velvet rope without hesitation. Darius felt a rush of exhilaration as they stepped into the club, the music washing over them in pulsing waves. The interior was a maze of flashing lights and writhing bodies. Darius allowed himself to be guided through the crowd, Brock's hand resting lightly on the small of his back. They found a spot near the bar, and Aran went to fetch drinks while Brock turned to Darius with a grin. "Care to dance, Cindy?" he asked, holding out his hand. Darius hesitated for a moment, then took the offered hand. "I'd love to," he replied, pitching his voice to be heard over the music. As they moved onto the dance floor, Darius felt a moment of panic. He'd never danced as a woman before. But as the music flowed through him, he found himself moving instinctively, swaying his hips and raising his arms above his head. Brock matched his movements, their bodies moving in sync to the pounding rhythm. For a while, Darius lost himself in the music and the moment. The heat of the club, the press of bodies around them, the flashing lights, it all blended into a sensory whirlwind that swept away his doubts and hesitations. He was Cindy now, beautiful and desirable, moving with a grace he'd never known he possessed. As the song changed, Brock leaned in close, his lips brushing Darius's ear. "You're a natural on the dance floor," he said, his breath hot against Darius's skin. Darius felt a shiver run down his spine, unsure if it was from the compliment or the proximity. He pulled back slightly, offering a coy smile. "Thanks. I'm having a great time." They danced for what felt like hours, occasionally returning to the bar for drinks and to touch base with Aran. As the night wore on, Darius found himself growing more and more comfortable in his role. He flirted effortlessly with Brock, laughed at his jokes, and even dared to dance with a few other men who approached him. It wasn't until he excused himself to visit the restroom that Darius remembered the true purpose of their outing. As he made his way through the crowd, he kept his eyes open for any signs of the illegal activities they'd been sent to investigate. In the relative quiet of the restroom, Darius took a moment to gather his thoughts. He touched up his makeup, reapplying his lipstick with a steady hand. As he was about to leave, he overheard a snippet of conversation from two women touching up their own makeup. "Did you see that guy by the VIP area?" one of them said, her voice low and excited. "I heard he's the one bringing in all the good stuff." The other woman hushed her friend, looking around nervously. "Keep your voice down. You know we're not supposed to talk about that here." Darius's heart raced. This could be the lead they'd been waiting for. He exited the restroom casually, making his way back to Brock and Aran. As he approached, he caught Brock's eye and gave a subtle nod, their prearranged signal that he had information to share. Brock immediately pulled Darius close, as if they were simply a couple reuniting on the dance floor. "What did you find?" he murmured, his lips close to Darius's ear. "Overheard something about a guy in the VIP area," Darius replied, keeping his voice low. "Sounds like he might be our target." Brock nodded, his expression neutral, but his eyes alert. "Good work. We'll need to get closer to the VIP section. Think you can charm your way in?" Darius felt a flutter of nervousness, but nodded. "I'll do my best." They made their way across the dance floor, Darius leading the way with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. As they approached the VIP area, a burly bouncer stepped forward, blocking their path. "VIP only," he grunted, eyeing them suspiciously. Darius summoned every ounce of feminine charm he could muster. He leaned in close to the bouncer, allowing his dress to ride up slightly as he placed a hand on the man's muscular arm. "Oh, come on," he purred, his voice a throaty whisper. "Surely you can make an exception for little old me." "I promise we'll behave." The bouncer's stern expression wavered, his eyes darting between Darius's face and the hand on his arm. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped aside. "All right, but don't cause any trouble." Darius flashed him a dazzling smile. "You're a doll. Thank you so much." As they entered the VIP area, Darius felt a rush of triumph. He'd done it. They were in. The space was more subdued than the main floor, with plush seating areas and a private bar. Darius scanned the room, trying to identify their target without being too obvious. Brock guided them to an empty booth, ordering a round of drinks as they settled in. Darius leaned in close, ostensibly nuzzling Brock's neck, but really using the opportunity to murmur in his ear. "Guy in the blue shirt, corner booth. He matches the description." Brock nodded almost imperceptibly, his arm draped casually around Darius's shoulders. They spent the next hour observing their target, watching as he engaged in hushed conversations with various patrons. It was clear something illicit was happening, but they needed concrete evidence. As the night wore on, Darius found himself growing tired. The constant vigilance, combined with the unfamiliar clothing and the strain of maintaining his feminine persona, was taking its toll. He leaned against Brock, allowing himself a moment of respite. Brock seemed to sense his fatigue. "You ready to call it a night, sweetheart?" he asked, loud enough to be heard by those around them. Darius nodded, stifling a yawn. "I think so. It's been a wonderful evening, but I'm exhausted." They made their way out of the club, the cool night air a relief after the stuffy interior. As they waited for their car, Darius found himself leaning against Brock, his head resting on the other man's shoulder. It felt natural, comfortable, a thought that both thrilled and terrified him. The drive back was quiet, the adrenaline of the evening giving way to a bone-deep weariness. When they arrived at the safe house, Darius was barely able to keep his eyes open. Brock helped him inside, his touch gentle and considerate. "You did great tonight, Darius," Brock said softly as they entered the living room. "We got some solid intel, thanks to you." Darius managed a tired smile. "Thanks. It was an experience." He collapsed onto the couch, kicking off his heels with a groan of relief. Brock chuckled, settling down beside him. "So, what did you think of your first night as a woman?" Brock asked, his tone light but his eyes searching. Darius was quiet for a moment, considering. "It was eye-opening," he said finally. "Exhausting, but also exhilarating in a way I didn't expect." Brock nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It can be like that. You discover parts of yourself you never knew existed." There was a moment of charged silence between them, filled with unspoken questions and possibilities. Darius found himself leaning towards Brock, drawn by a force he couldn't quite name. But before anything could happen, Aron entered the room, breaking the spell. "All right, team. Good work tonight. We'll debrief in the morning. Get some rest." Darius nodded, suddenly acutely aware of how he must look. Makeup smudged, wig askew, dress rumpled. He stood up, swaying slightly on his feet. I should get changed," he mumbled, gesturing vaguely towards the bedroom. Brock stood as well, concern etched on his face. "Do you need any help?" Darius shook his head, managing a small smile. "No, I think I can manage. But thank you. For everything." As he made his way to the bedroom, Darius's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The evening had been a success in terms of their mission, but it had also awakened something in him, something he wasn't quite ready to face. He closed the bedroom door behind him, leaning against it for a moment as he took a deep breath. Slowly, he began the process of shedding his feminine persona. He removed the wig, wiped away the makeup, and peeled off the dress. With each layer that came off, he felt more like himself, and yet somehow less complete. As he crawled into bed, exhaustion finally overtaking him, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. He'd gone into this assignment expecting it to be a simple act, a role to play. But somewhere between the restaurant and the dance floor, between the flirting and the investigation, the lines had blurred. He drifted off to sleep, his dreams a confusing mix of flashing lights, pulsing music, and Brock's gentle touch. Tomorrow would bring a new day, new challenges, and the need to process everything that had happened. But for now, Darius allowed himself to rest, knowing that whatever came next, he had discovered a strength and adaptability within himself that he'd never known existed. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, Darius stirred, his body aching in unfamiliar ways. The events of the previous night came rushing back, a kaleidoscope of sensations and emotions. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair as he tried to gather his thoughts. A soft knock at the door startled him. "Darius, are you awake?" It was Bria's voice, gentle but insistent. "Yeah, come in," he called out, his voice rough with sleep. Bria entered, carrying a tray with coffee and some light breakfast. She set it down on the bedside table before taking a seat on the edge of the bed. Her eyes were kind but searching as she looked at him. "How are you feeling?" she asked, handing him a steaming mug of coffee. Darius took a sip, grateful for the jolt of caffeine. "Honestly, I'm not sure. It's all a bit overwhelming." Bria nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's normal. Your first deep cover assignment is always intense, especially one that involves such a dramatic transformation." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments as Darius sipped his coffee and nibbled on a piece of toast. Finally, Bria spoke again, her voice soft but serious. "Darius, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Did you enjoy being Cindy?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Darius felt his heart rate quicken as he considered his response. He thought about the thrill of successfully passing as a woman, the exhilaration of dancing with abandon, the strange comfort he'd found in Brock's arms. Yes, he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than I expected to. More than I think I should have." Bria reached out, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "There's no shame in that, Darius. Many agents find that these assignments allow them to explore different facets of their personality. It doesn't change who you are at your core." Darius nodded, grateful for her understanding. "But what does it mean for the mission? For my career?" "It means you're adaptable, which is a valuable trait in our line of work," Bria replied firmly. "As for the mission, you did excellently. The intel you gathered is exactly what we needed." She stood up, smoothing down her skirt. "Take some time to process everything. We'll have a full debriefing this afternoon. And Darius?" She paused at the door, looking back at him. "Remember, Cindy is a part of you now. You can learn from her, draw strength from her without losing yourself." As Bria left, Darius found himself pondering her words. He thought about the confidence he'd felt as Cindy, the way he'd moved through the world with a grace and assurance he'd never experienced as himself. Could he incorporate those qualities into his everyday life without compromising his identity? He spent the morning in quiet reflection, alternating between periods of introspection and brief conversations with Aaron and Brock. Both men were supportive, offering words of encouragement and sharing their own experiences with deep cover assignments. By the time the afternoon debriefing rolled around, Darius felt more centered, more at peace with the events of the previous night. He entered the conference room with his head held high, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The debriefing was thorough, with each team member recounting their observations and experiences. Darius spoke confidently about the intel he'd gathered, the conversations he'd overheard, and the suspicious activities he'd witnessed in the VIP area. As the meeting wound down, their supervisor leaned back in his chair, a satisfied expression on his face. "Excellent work, team. This information will be invaluable in our ongoing investigation. Darius, I want to commend you particularly on your performance. Your ability to adapt to your role was crucial to the success of this operation." Darius felt a surge of pride at the praise. "Thank you, sir. I'm glad I could contribute to the mission's success." The supervisor nodded, then leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Now, I have a proposition for you, Darius. Given your success in this role, we'd like you to consider taking on more assignments of this nature. Your ability to pass convincingly as a woman could be a significant asset in several ongoing operations." Darius felt a mix of excitement and apprehension at the suggestion. Part of him thrilled at the idea of stepping back into Cindy's shoes, of experiencing that rush of confidence and freedom again. but another part hesitated, worried about losing himself in the role.
I'd like some time to think about it, if that's all right,
he said finally. The supervisor nodded, understanding in his eyes.
Of course. Take all the time you need. This isn't a decision to be made lightly.
As they filed out of the conference room, Brock fell into step beside Darius.
Hey,
he said softly.
Want to grab a coffee and talk?
Darius nodded, grateful for the offer. They made their way to a nearby cafe, settling into a quiet corner booth. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, sipping their drinks and watching the world go by outside the window. Finally, Brock spoke.
So, what are you thinking about the supervisor's offer?
Darius sighed, running a hand through his hair.
I'm not sure. Part of me is excited by the idea, but another part is terrified. What if I lose myself in the role? What if I can't separate Darius from Cindy?
Brock nodded, understanding in his eyes.
It's a valid concern. But from what I saw last night, you have a strong sense of self. You were able to be Cindy without losing sight of the mission or your true identity. But I enjoyed it so much,
Darius confessed, his voice low.
More than I think I should have. There's nothing wrong with that,
Brock said firmly.
Enjoying a role doesn't make it any less of a performance. It just means you're good at what you do.
Darius pondered this for a moment, taking a sip of his coffee.
I suppose you're right. It's just... It opened up something in me that I didn't know was there, and I'm not sure what to do with that.
Brock reached across the table, placing his hand over Darius's.
You don't have to figure it all out right now. Take some time to process everything, and remember, whatever you decide, you have a team supporting you.
As they left the cafe, Darius felt a sense of calm settling over him. He still had a lot to think about, a lot to process, but he no longer felt overwhelmed by it all. He had discovered a new facet of himself, a new strength, and whether or not he chose to pursue more assignments as Cindy, that discovery was valuable in itself. Walking back to headquarters, Darius found himself standing a little taller, moving with a touch of the grace and confidence he'd embodied as Cindy. He realized that he didn't have to choose between Darius and Cindy. He could be both, incorporating the best aspects of each into his whole self. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.